Well, welcome Emilio from the University of Cambridge. So we're going to be learning about the predicting hunting pressures in tropical forests. Take it away, can't we, Zero?
Excellent. Yes, I am Emilio, first-year PhD student in the Department of Zoology at the University of Cambridge. I work with Anil, and just like Anil, I was pretty impressed with the existence of hills coming here. Long walk up the hill, no hills in Cambridge. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about my work on predicting hunting pressure. Let's get into it. So, Anil set the stage really well on this, but just to recap, there's this widespread loss of biodiversity that we're currently experiencing. If we look at something like the IUCN Red List, which has assessed, they've assessed roughly 170,000 species, just shy of 30%, so 28% of those assessed species have been deemed kind of threatened with extinction. And if we limit to mammals, that's 26%, birds, about 12%. The kind of single greatest threat on most animal species is habitat loss and land use and land cover change. And so, of course, thanks Anil for setting the stage on this, we have from the group this life metric, which looks at the effects of further habitat conversion on species extinctions. But of course, here we're only considering one threat, which is land use and land cover change, and we're still looking in a very binary sense, kind of assuming that across a species area of habitat where we think it occurs, it kind of occurs uniformly, so that doesn't take into account the variety of other things which might modulate the local kind of population density. Okay. So what are some other threats that species might be subject to? Here I've just to name a few, these are kind of some of the ones which most affect species after habitat loss. We have invasive species, agricultural practices, edge effects, and kind of fragmentation, so the composition of the habitat, whether or not it's kind of connected. And what I'm working on right now at least, which is hunting, which we know really severely affects a lot of mammal species, and in particular tropical mammal species. So we want to predict hunting pressure. We unfortunately don't have data sets which actually kind of directly capture the level of hunter efforts. So this is like the amount of hunters in an area and how long they're going out to hunt for, and whatever they're catching. We have kind of indirect data which kind of looks at how hunting is modulating local population abundance for different species. And so here I've got a map of the world. In green, the tropical forest zone, and this great data set from Benitez Lopez et al. From 2019 that collects together a bunch of different hunting studies. And so at each one of these study sites, we collect two population abundance measures and make a comparison. The first, in red, is our kind of actual study site, the place where we think that there's either that there is hunting, or at least hunting at a very high level of pressure. And we make the comparison with a control site where we think there's very little hunting or no hunting. And these are matched such that they're spatially close together, but also that they have pretty similar characteristics. And so we measure population abundance or density or some version of this in both of these areas. So the number of individuals here, I have 4 in the hunted area, 6 in the unhunted area, and we divide one by the other. And so here we're interpreting this, and there are a lot of caveats to this interpretation, but we're interpreting this as the population reduction which is attributable to hunting. So here, 0.67, if it were 1, that would mean no abundance effect. If it were 0, that would mean local extirpation, so it's wiped out. 0.67 implies kind of roughly 33% population abundance reduction due to hunting. Okay, so that's one end of the equation. The other end is, of course, the predictors. So here we have kind of two kind of broad groups, which are one, the spatial data products, which capture the local socioeconomic or environmental conditions, things which might determine the extent to which hunting is necessary for subsistence, or the extent to which there's hunting for trophy hunting or poaching or so on and so forth. Here I've highlighted travel time to nearest large city, but there's also things like the prevalence of stunting and malnutrition, literacy rate, the protection status. And then on the other end, we have this group of species traits which tell us a bit about the species, the extent to which it's likely to be targeted by hunting, and its kind of population vulnerability to hunting. And so here, the main one is body mass, so how large the species is. There's one last little hiccup before we can kind of do our modeling, which is the fact that our response ratios have kind of a strange distribution. On the right here, I have the full distribution of response ratios, or I guess your left, where you can see there's this kind of long tail. And if you zoom in to the 0 to 1 range, which is where most of the data lies, there's a big spike at 0, which is local extirpation, and a big spike at 1, which is kind of no abundance effect. And the spike at 0 is really interesting. We want to be able to capture that because that's kind of like the most severe effect due to hunting. And so to do this, we do kind of a two-stage modeling approach, where first we have one model which predicts whether or not the species is locally extirpated. If so, then we are predicting a response ratio of 0. And if the model says, no, it's not locally extirpated, we pass along the predictors to a second model, which is going to regress a non-zero abundance response. So potentially, abundance has been reduced, but it hasn't been completely wiped out locally. And then the last little bit here is figuring out how to evaluate these models. So on one hand, we want to be sure that the models can generalize taxonomically and spatially, because there's going to be quite a lot of that happening when we actually apply the models out to all tropical mammal species and over the full tropical forest zone. So a couple of different types of cross-validation to assess that. And then in terms of the different metrics used, I have kind of, if you kind of imagine for a particular point, which I have there in yellow, there's kind of a class of metrics which look at kind of some function of the absolute error, so the distance from the 1-1 line, is like median, mean, error, and percentage errors. And then, since this is like quite a difficult task, as you'll see, I also have a class of metrics which look more at, does the model put things roughly in the right place? So here I have kind of a Wasserstein distributional distance and kind of a balanced accuracy on placing things in roughly the right buckets. So some results, kind of preliminary, but promising modeling results, where we see under kind of at least standard cross-validation, where we're not trying to kind of assess taxonomic or spatial generalization explicitly, that the two machine learning methods here, the legend has disappeared, but in green I have random forest, and blue XGBoost, so two decision tree type models. And then in red I have a kind of a baseline linear model. And you can see that the green and blue, the two machine learning decision tree ensemble methods, are doing substantially better. Just to emphasize, I'm expressing everything as percent improvements over guessing the median response ratio from the training set. So there I'm just trying to, instead of saying, my median absolute percentage error is, 33%, which is a little bit difficult to interpret, I'm trying to say, here's the actual benefit of using predicted modeling beyond just, going to the data and taking an average or a median or something. Cool, so the machine learning methods work pretty well. It turns out that the linear model doesn't work so well. Sometimes we'll do a little bit worse than kind of guessing the median. If we look at taxonomic cross-validation, it's roughly the same story. Again, the green and blue machine learning methods are doing better than in red, the baseline linear model. But when we come over to the spatial cross-validation, you can see that things are a little bit more sketchy. while we're still distributionally kind of putting things in the right place and making a substantial improvement over just guessing a single value, which is kind of what we expect, so cautious mean distance and balanced accuracy, we're doing roughly as well or a little bit worse than guessing the median when we're trying to spatially generalize to very distant areas. And so it kind of indicates that there should be some caution in interpreting predictions in spatially, areas which are spatially distant from training areas. Just looking a little bit more closely at the fitting coefficients and the feature importances for the random forest model, we can see that body mass is really important, which makes sense, right? Something which is very large is very likely to be hunted, but it's also, because it has a lot of meat, if it's for subsistence hunting, but also is likely to be very affected in a population sense because they've got long generation times. And you can see, for instance, in the random forest model, there are a couple extra variables: protection status, literacy rate, livestock biomass, which weren't retained by the linear model and were kind of the least important. And if we look at kind of the other model, this is the one which says, is this thing locally extirpated or not? Again, body mass, super important for both models, but for instance, protection status is not so important for the random forest model, and much more so important in the linear model, so potentially hinting at differences in learned patterns. And then just to wrap up, what I'm currently working on, and this is producing just kind of heaps of data, which I'm kind of trying to wrangle and summarize, but I'm kind of taking the trained models and from the range in green, subtracting out the areas which are not within the species habitat preferences to get an area of habitat, and then applying the models to every pixel, every kind of 1 arc-minute pixel within those area of habitats, doing this for about 3,200 tropical mammal forest species, just about half of all mammal species globally, and then kind of looking at the taxonomic and spatial patterns there. Thanks so much. Let me know if you have questions, and here's a link to my personal site and my email address if you want to reach out afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. We've got time for maybe 2 really quick questions, if anyone's got one.
Thanks. So one of the last things you said was how many species you'd included. Can I ask where you found such amazing diverse data on the sort of abundance of species right across the topics?
Yeah, so the number which I had mentioned right at the end, 3,300 species, represents the kind of final application set. In terms of the actual number of mammals in the data set on abundances, I think it's about 8% of that number. So whatever that brings us to, about 300 species, I think. And so that's in a collected metadata set, which goes through and it kind of scrape the literature for these kind of field studies and collect them together, where they all kind of had to have the criteria that matched matched methodology between a control site and a hunted study site. So yes, that's this Benitez Lopez data set, which has collected together all those field studies.
Really nice talk. You described that you were comparing hunted and non-hunted areas with similar attributes. How do you select the areas how do you select that they have similar attributes?
Yeah, ideally you would do it with as many variables as possible. So you can there are a lot of these different types of matching, counterfactual or reference level matching approaches, which will take into account all these different socioeconomic conditions, so on and so forth. The actual matching criteria for the data set that I'm using is actually quite simple, just so that you can include as many studies as possible, where first off, they need to be spatially pretty close to each other. The control area needs to be further away from an access point like a road or a settlement than the study area. And then third off, if there is a particular threat in one of the areas, either the control or the study site, that there's the same threat in the other, so there isn't that confounding effect. So if there's logging in one, there should be logging in the other at roughly the same intensity, but there is a lot of noise inherent in that kind of matching procedure.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. If I can ask one quick question. So, by the looks of things, from your cross-validation, there's strong spatial structures in your data set. Have you thought about how you might deal with that?
Yeah, so definitely the kind of hints, the fact that the spatial cross-validation yielded the worst results hints at the potential, certainly, that there's kind of very biased spatial sampling. I haven't thought about how to explicitly integrate that into the model other than at the end stage trying to integrate kind of spatial uncertainty just by how far am I in spatially from my study areas, and how far am I in kind of environmental space as well. So I thought about it, kind of the downstream use, just to say, okay, maybe I shouldn't try to interpret predictions here because it's too far from my training data, but not so much about how to actually improve model performance in that sense.
I don't think there's any one right answer for this, right? It's a tricky problem that we all have to deal with, so it's great to see that you're doing that work. Brilliant, well, thank you very much. Brilliant, thank you again. And if we could have our next speaker.